modern fast Grand Touring coupe might be the most revered and desired vehicle type of them all, and for some pretty obvious reasons, but is it quite modern enough?
That is the question we'll be pondering today, here on the Route Napoleon. And to begin to do it, we've got this, a Mercedes-AMG GT63S 4-door, which, as the name would suggest, has 4 doors and 4 usable adult-sized seats. And that tends to be the way with a lot of big GTs these days. I think GT drivers like that. It makes for slightly bigger cars, I think, but this one actually still looks pretty mega for all of its size and its bulk. It's also got, while we're on the subject, a 630 horsepower turbo V8 engine. It's got an active torque-vectored four-wheel drive system. It's got a very spacious and luxurious, pleasant interior, the kind of place you could very happily while away a few hundred miles on the auto route if you so chose. And of course it's got all of the conferred status of a German premium automotive brand right there on the bonnet.
This car will hit 62 miles an hour from rest in just 3.2 seconds and 196 miles an hour flat out. It will do around 400 miles before emptying its 66-litre fuel tank, and that tank can be refilled in less time than it takes to check your WhatsApp and empty your What's-It. It handles really well for something so big and long-legged too, like a proper rear-drive sports car when you want it to, and it sounds, well, pretty fab. Have a listen.
Now, it's important to point out, I feel, that fast GT cars haven't always been this good. They haven't always been capable of accelerating like a modern supercar or being as practical and usable as a medium-sized family estate. I mean, no, they haven't. And you could say that having come this far, the last thing we need to do is change the recipe. But of course, in light of our collective ambitions to get to net zero carbon emissions over the next 10 years or 20 or 30 or however long it actually takes, of course, we are going to change the recipe. The modern GT car must embrace electrification. Yeah, and as you will know, there are a couple that already have.
The Porsche Taycan is the very latest luxury Grand Tourer to arrive on the electric car market. The Polestar 1 has zero emissions running capability too, but unlike the Porsche, it also has a 4-cylinder engine, making it a plug-in hybrid. And so the AMG feeds solely on hydrocarbons and the Porsche feeds solely on direct current, and the Polestar, well, that can do either, or sometimes both. All 3 cars have around about 600 horsepower, all 3 have 4 usable seats, all 3 weigh more than 2 tonnes, and it's the one with both electric and combustion engines, unsurprisingly, that's the heaviest and the slowest accelerating of them all, although 4.2 seconds to 62 miles an hour is hardly slow. As unlikely as this may seem, all 3 are also £140,000 purchases by the time you've lavished an option or 2 on them.
So what we'd like to find out is whether it's the all-electric Porsche or this clever plug-in hybrid Polestar that's more likely to have the bigger impact on the development of the continent-crushing GT car. There's a good chance you'll already know about the 600 horsepower Polestar 1, not least because of its phenomenal good looks. They're the sort of looks that only really come about when your company's chief designer goes on to become CEO. It uses not 1 but 2 electric motors to drive the rear axle, so that's 1 for each wheel, meaning it can vector torque freely from side to side and uses that to increase agility. More powerful still is the 2-litre petrol engine up front, which is both turbocharged and supercharged. In other words, it never was going to handle in classic rear-driven GT car fashion, and it doesn't. That said, agility and road holding are pretty astonishing given the Volvo underpinnings. You can really put this car through corners with a lot of confidence. I mean, the grip is astonishing actually, considering it's so heavy. Another thing about this car, of course, is with only a turbocharged, supercharged 4-cylinder engine, it doesn't make the romantic noise we want with a GT car either, and you've only got 4 straining cylinders. And it's okay when you're just cruising along because they tend to back out of the equation. But when you're really pushing it, it's not a car that sings, and that's a shame because the exterior design is dynamite. So given this is Polestar's first go at a car like this, I'd say the handling and the powertrain are massively impressive, but they're just a bit unemotional. And that's a shame because I think in other ways this car really captures the romance we want from big drives in special cars. And that's before you've even considered the fact that it will drive pretty much from London to Geneva on a single tank. You could drive it around town all weekend without burning a single hydrocarbon and then head back. And that's an incredible level of versatility. there are other things I like about this car, and one of those things is the ambience, which I think is really special. People might wonder whether a Volvo interior works in a 140 grand car, and I think it absolutely does. It's somehow cozy yet spacious in here. You've got this high GT style scuttle and then loads of light flooding in through the panoramic roof. It's a really lovely place to spend time. Probably nicer than the other two cars here actually. And I could see myself driving in this car all day. And you've got a great driving position as well. Long leg, short arm if you want it. Classic GT car. Only problem is, because of the battery packs, there's so little boot space, and the back seats aren't great either. In fact, I'd have been tempted to just go with a 550 Maranello style deck in the back, and you could just put your luggage on that. And to drive, well, with so much electric torque, this thing murders the AMG for throttle response. And even though it's mainly front wheel drive, the way it gets out of corners is pretty astonishing as well. Okay, so the steering's a little bit elastic and it's pretty light and there's not a great sense of connection or feeling, but it's accurate and it does give you confidence in a car like this. And to be honest, that's all you can ask with such a massively wide and heavy thing. On this evidence, plug-in hybrid powertrain definitely has some potential with GT cars going forward. If the aim here is to keep these sort of cars on sale for as long as possible, and the only way to do that is to have some electric portion of the powertrain, I think you compromise the GT brief too much by going all electric at this stage. And I also think that GT cars, just the way they are dynamically, can wear a little bit of the extra battery weight better than pure sports cars, for example. So I think there's definitely potential in the plug-in hybrid GT car field. I'm not sure this Polestar is quite the right way to do it. I think you've got to have a rear bias in the power delivery. I'd like a little bit less weight, but I think the versatility of this thing is absolutely mega, and the performance and the security and the confidence are all there, and of course it looks fabulous as well. It doesn't develop the same sort of flow as the AMG, and it doesn't have the hair trigger response of the Taycan, but I think if you're the sort of driver who doesn't take the whole thing too seriously and just needs the versatility of petrol, likes the fact that the car can be driven on electric power in town driving, I think the Polestar has a lot to offer, and I think the principle of a plug-in hybrid GT car works pretty well.
So that is the plug-in hybrid option covered off, and I do like it. The Polestar one's a cracking looking car, it's lovely to be in, it's a great GT, I think it's fast enough, it handles well enough. It's great, but you have to sort of recognise that as far as the UK government's big new car electrification plans are concerned for 2035, it might as well have a Chevy small block in it. It is as redundant as a combustion engine car, isn't it? Or it's going to be. And if you want to buy a GT car now that's going to remain in tune with public opinion, then you have to buy an electric one. And this is an electric one. This is the new Porsche Taycan Turbo S. And it is unlike any electric car I have ever driven.
Firstly, compared with these rival GTs, doesn't it just look incredible? Seeing it in context makes all the difference. It's just so low, it seems almost vacuum sealed to the tarmac at times, and it feels surprisingly narrow and compact on the road too. It's all short-nosed, low-scuttled and easy to see out of. It advertises driver appeal before it's even moved.
And then it moves. And yikes, oh, does it move? I mean, it's just incredible, this car. It is a 2.3 tonne car that goes and steers and handles and stops and just drives like no other 2.3 tonne car you've ever been anywhere near. I mean, this car accelerates like it's been fired out of a cannon. It's just ridiculous. It's the sort of accelerator pedal that you need to have a good stiff word with yourself before you go anywhere near it, right in the bottom of the travel. But, you know, we've driven big expensive EVs before, and yes, they're fast, aren't they? They've got lots of torque, they are quick. What we haven't driven, mostly, are cars like this that really ride and handle like the best drivers' cars in the business, and this one does that. It handles like a Porsche. It does not handle like most other electric cars. And it steers so beautifully, it could be a mid-engine sports car. It's got natural poise, It corners flat because you sit so low in it. Yes, it's heavy, but you don't feel the weight. There's just no sense of it at all. The handling response is absolutely pin sharp. And until you get to really big speeds, it just doesn't feel like a remotely heavy car. If I had to guess, if I didn't know, and I do know this is 2.3 tonnes, it's not magic, it can't be, but if I didn't know that and I had to guess what it weighed, I'd probably say 1.5 tonnes. You'd probably think, sporty BMW 3 Series sort of weight. That's what it feels like, except it feels like a car that handles and responds even better than that would suggest. And that's just so much performance. It's incredible. What a thing. So there you go. The Taycan is a real driver's car, and absolutely, it's properly exciting. And when you're not driving it in an environment like this, it's lovely, it's quiet, but it is perhaps a little bit sterile compared to a car like the AMG. Electric cars are like that, aren't they? The interesting thing is, compared to the engine noise that the Polestar's 4-cylinder motor makes, I think I actually prefer the synthesised engine noise that this Taycan makes. There we are, it's on. Now let's have a listen. Isn't that interesting? It's very sci-fi. It's a bit like Luke Skywalker's land speeder hover car, isn't it? Sort of crossed with Humpback Whale song or something. It's interesting. And somebody's thought about it. It's this sort of rising and falling harmonic which has several layers, and it changes with throttle position and speed, and then when you really get into the pedal and you can begin to hear the actual electric motors, they just come in above those harmonics that you're already listening to, like it was all intended that way, like they're meant, like it's meant to sound like that. So it sounds like something that's genuinely been thought about and considered, not developed in some sort of glorious digital isolation in a lab by a bloke with headphones on.
But, and this is a rather large but actually, many of you will have seen it coming, although some will fervently disagree, the Taycan is not a GT car. It looks like one, it's sized like one, it's priced like one, but in the real world, you'll do well to get 200 miles from the 93 kilowatt hour battery, and even at the quickest rapid chargers, it's a 40-minute process to recharge it. At most public chargers, it'll probably take twice as long as that. Sadly, that's where we're at with our charging infrastructure, and if you do want to drive a long way fairly quickly, as GT cars often do, that is a suboptimal situation, particularly if you don't want to be bound to a particular route or a schedule, which kind of sucks the joy and the adventure out of long road trips, I find.
So there you go. Maybe we just have to accept that the electric car is never going to make a particularly good long-distance GT. Maybe the idea of long-distance personal transport in that sort of continent-crossing non-stop sense that we've known it, maybe that dies with the combustion engine. I'd hate to think it would, but I've yet to see any real evidence to the contrary, so we'll see. But whether that's true or not, I don't think it does much to harm the stature or the reputation of the Porsche Taycan, because you may or may not call it a GT. I'm not sure that it is one, but I tell you, it is a great car nonetheless, and it is so much better to drive than either of the other two. Oh, it's incredible.
So there you have it. The Porsche wins, or maybe it's not quite that straightforward. But anyway, stay tuned to this channel for more on the brilliant Porsche Taycan later this year. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.